Altitude 12 kilometers minus 50 degrees outside, and a single wrong drop of fuel could turn this quiet flight into a screaming fireball you'd never survive. Airlines swear planes can't run on the gasoline in your car, and the terrifying reason has almost nothing to do with money. There's a buried Siberian incident where one careless splash of the wrong liquid silenced an engine midair, thousands of meters above frozen nothing. You've been lied to about what's really sloshing inside those thin metal wings above your head, and why kerosene alone keeps you alive. Stay until the end, because the darkest secret hides inside the flame itself, where ordinary fuel would tear a jet apart from within. Altitude 12 kilometers. Outside the passenger jet, the temperature drops below minus 50 degrees, colder than almost anywhere a human being will ever stand. And yet, inside those thin metal wings, dozens of tons of fuel are riding along, holding the lives of hundreds of people. You might think a plane could simply run on ordinary gasoline, the same fuel you pour into your car every week. But at this height, that familiar liquid would turn into a nightmare, threatening every single second of the flight above the clouds. One wrong choice of fuel up here can stall the engines, spark a fire, or trigger disaster in the middle of the open sky. At first, you probably assume airlines pick kerosene simply because it is cheaper than everything else on the market. The real reason runs far deeper than money, and it touches physics that most passengers never even imagine exists. Kerosene survives brutal cold better, ignites far more slowly, and behaves much more safely inside the enormous engines carrying you forward. Stay with me, because you are about to see exactly why planes burn kerosene and what really happens if you fuel a jet wrong. Most people never once wonder what is actually sloshing around inside the wings of an airliner gliding high above the clouds. Ask a random stranger on the street what fuels an aircraft, and you will almost certainly hear one confident word: gasoline. When that same person learns a multi-ton machine flies on plain kerosene, a familiar little theory instantly springs to life. They imagine airlines and manufacturers simply decided to save billions of dollars by choosing a cheap, low-grade liquid instead of quality fuel. Believers in this idea are convinced kerosene is nothing more than a throwaway leftover of oil refining, bought for almost nothing. But this comfortable explanation is completely wrong, and it has almost nothing in common with the harsh reality of aviation. Producing modern jet fuel is an incredibly complex, high-technology process that sometimes costs more than refining even the most premium gasoline. To understand the true reason behind this choice, you have to rewind time to when the first machines were only beginning to fly. In aviation's earliest days, designers really did use ordinary automobile gasoline, the exact same fuel you could buy in any small shop. Those early piston engines barely differed from car motors, so they ran happily on light, volatile, easily flammable fuel without complaint. Planes back then flew low, moved slowly, and their pilots never even dreamed of climbing to the enormous heights we cross today. In those years, gasoline seemed like the perfect answer, and the pioneers of the sky were certain it would rule forever. Everything changed the moment humanity decided to build gigantic, heavy aircraft and send them soaring far above the clouds for speed and comfort. As soon as engineers pushed powerful machines higher and forced them faster than sound, the old familiar rules mercilessly stopped working. It turned out that fuel behaves in wildly different ways down in warm surface air versus the freezing emptiness far above. The gasoline that performed so beautifully near the ground suddenly created serious, unpredictable dangers once the conditions around it changed. Heavy aviation showed engineers plainly that blindly copying automobile technology led straight to critical failures deep inside their flying machines. That was the moment specialists realized conquering the sky demanded a completely different source of energy, one built to survive extreme punishment. And so began a vast investigation into the hidden properties of liquids, leading to discoveries that were surprising and, honestly, a little frightening. When passengers settle into soft seats and gaze at the fluffy clouds drifting below, they never guess how hostile that world truly is. At roughly 10,000 meters, the ordinary earthly reality you know simply vanishes, replaced by something alien and unforgiving. Because of how airliners are built, the fuel sits directly inside the flat interior of the wings, right against the outside air. That close contact with the extreme environment cools the fuel rapidly, and out here, cold becomes the deadliest enemy of any machine. Here, a silent, invisible battle begins, where a single mistake in choosing fuel leads straight to a total loss of engine power. The wings, serving as giant fuel tanks, are blasted through and through by this savage frost, chilling the liquid to extreme lows. You might assume gasoline, being so volatile, should shrug off any cold easily, but that is yet another deep and dangerous misconception. If engineers dared pour automobile fuel into the tanks of a huge, high-altitude jet, the consequences would be absolutely catastrophic. As temperatures fall, different fuels start behaving completely unpredictably, revealing hidden natural flaws that stay invisible on the warm ground. Many petroleum products contain special substances that, under intense cold, begin rapidly changing their very structure from the inside out. Gasoline loses its useful qualities fast in the stratosphere, but heavier fuel blends behave even worse, turning into thick, impassable jelly. The greatest danger for a flying plane lies in crystallization and the slow release of dense, waxy sediment inside the fuel. Once the liquid in the wings cools past a critical point, microscopic solid particles begin quietly being born within it. These tiny flakes clog the finest pores of the fuel filters and block the narrow channels feeding the combustion chambers. Like a solid plug jammed into a pipe, this blockage instantly cuts off the flow of energy to the engines. The jet then loses thrust and must glide toward an emergency landing because the pumps simply cannot push that frozen mass through. To truly grasp this hidden problem, just remember one real and deeply instructive incident above the frozen expanses of Siberia. The plane had been airborne for hours when cockpit sensors suddenly warned of a sharp pressure drop in the left engine's fuel line. The captain tried increasing the fuel supply, but the motor ignored him, then died completely amid the silent, endless sky. The cause was a tiny batch of fuel that, through careless handling on the ground, had been touched by traces of ordinary diesel. In the extreme cold, those hidden impurities instantly turned into a dense, waxy film that sealed the filter and starved the engine. This is exactly where pure aviation kerosene steps onto the stage, armed with a naturally unique resistance to bitter, punishing cold. Cleansed of every harmful impurity, it stays completely liquid, clear, and flowing even when the temperature sinks to minus 47 degrees and lower. Its special hydrocarbon makeup lets this oily liquid completely ignore the freezing breath of the stratosphere without thickening at all. Kerosene will not congeal, will not separate into layers inside the tanks, and will not become a paste of frozen wax. This guarantees smooth, uninterrupted work from those powerful turbines through the long, cold hours of a flight across the world. But perfect resistance to that cosmic cold is only a small part of the trials waiting for fuel at extreme heights. Frost is far from the only enemy, and it may not even be the most cunning threat a jet faces up there. Something far more frightening starts happening to the liquid the moment the familiar weight of the atmosphere stops pressing down on it. What happens to volatile fuel when you suddenly change the pressure around it? And what invisible force could tear metal tanks apart from within? To understand this next hidden danger, you have to mentally rise with the plane to where the air becomes incredibly thin. Down here on the ground, a huge, invisible column of atmosphere constantly presses on every object and every single drop of liquid. You never notice it, but that weighty pressure holds the molecules of any fuel firmly in place, stopping them from scattering wildly. Yet as the airliner climbs, the density of the air outside begins falling faster and faster with every passing meter. At 10 kilometers, that protective atmospheric shield weakens several times over, and inside the tank something genuinely alarming begins to unfold. If gasoline fills the tank, the violently escaping vapor instantly gathers into huge bubbles racing through the fuel lines. Traveling along those tubes, the vapor forms solid pockets, a blockage that eventually reaches the pump and seals the path completely. Instead of a steady stream of fuel, pure emptiness rushes into the engine, and the motor chokes and shuts down mid-flight. In early aviation, working machines sometimes lost altitude and people blamed mysterious air pockets, when the real culprit was boiling gasoline. Bubbling gasoline also creates a colossal threat to the wings themselves, one that engineers absolutely could not ignore. The escaping gases build excess pressure, deforming the internal structural elements of the wing from the inside like an inflating balloon. To avoid that nightmare, engineers would need massive, heavy, reinforced tanks. But then the jet would grow too heavy to ever leave the ground. That is precisely why the choice of designers fell on stable, dependable kerosene, with its phenomenal resistance to pressure changes. Even in extreme high-altitude conditions, kerosene behaves calmly and stubbornly refuses to boil, no matter how thin the air becomes. It flows obediently along the lines in a dense, even stream, guaranteeing the pumps never once swallow useless emptiness. Kerosene builds no dangerous pressure inside the wings, letting the whole aircraft stay light, slim, and reliable in the sky. But what happens if this stable liquid meets an open danger down on the ground, far below the clouds? And why can a single ordinary spark instantly decide the fate of hundreds of trusting passengers waiting for takeoff? In civil aviation, fire safety is raised into an absolute cult, because the smallest mistake on the ground becomes tragedy in the sky. Every time a massive fuel truck rolls up to a gleaming airliner, one of the most critical pre-flight rituals begins. To grasp the scale of this hidden threat, just compare how two liquids react when they meet a stray, static spark. The key value here is the flash point, the temperature at which a fuel starts releasing enough invisible vapor to ignite. Automobile gasoline, on this front, behaves like a genuine powder keg, waiting for the smallest excuse to explode. It actively releases explosive gases, even in a savage frost of -40, so the space around the tank stays wrapped in an invisible, flammable cloud. If even one tiny static spark jumps during gasoline fueling, it instantly ignites the vapor and the aircraft is lost. Aviation kerosene behaves completely differently, standing much closer in nature to a heavy, sluggish, oily liquid than to a volatile one. To ignite this dense substance in open air, you must apply enormous effort, since its flash point sits above 38 degrees of warmth. If you accidentally spill a puddle of kerosene on cold concrete and toss a lit match in, it simply hisses out harmlessly. This remarkable property reduces the risk of accidental ignition to a bare minimum while crews service these enormous flying machines. This difference becomes truly decisive in critical moments, during an emergency or brutally hard landing gone terribly wrong. Picture a multi-ton airliner touching down at huge speed without its landing gear, the fuselage grinding fiercely against the concrete runway. A solid sheet of bright sparks bursts from beneath the machine's metal belly, and the strong wings may deform and spring a serious leak. If volatile gasoline gushed from those ruptured tanks in that instant, containing the resulting fire would be practically impossible. Kerosene, however, pours from the broken wing in heavy, dense streams and catches fire extremely reluctantly, resisting every spark around it. That reluctance hands rescuers and crew the precious minutes needed to fully evacuate every passenger from inside the cabin. This exact iron logic is built into the very heart of how modern wing tanks are designed and positioned. Engineers deliberately place the colossal fuel reserves in the inner cavities of the wing, as far as possible from the passenger cabin. A complex system of internal partitions stops the oily kerosene from sloshing chaotically during sharp maneuvers, keeping the plane perfectly balanced. So by choosing kerosene, humanity gained not just an efficient energy source, but a reliable shield quietly saving thousands of lives daily. But if safety and cold resistance are already proven, what deeper secret hides inside the flame itself? And why does ordinary gasoline lose to kerosene in the single most important battle of all, the fight for pure power? Now we reach the greatest secret of all, the one that lets multi-ton aircraft confidently slice through the vast ocean of air. The laws of physics flip your everyday assumptions about fuel power completely upside down, revealing a striking engineering paradox. In aviation, one special measurement takes center stage, defining the density of energy packed into every single unit of volume. A plane is built so the space inside its wings is rigidly limited by the size of the metal structure. You cannot make the tanks bottomless, because then the wing would grow too thick and lose its precious aerodynamic shape. The machine simply would not hold itself up in the rushing stream of air, no matter how powerful its engines were. Designers must pour into that strictly fixed volume a liquid that releases the maximum possible energy when it finally burns. Here, heavy, oily kerosene beats gasoline decisively, because 1 liter of kerosene hides far more pure energy than the same liter of light fuel. To understand how this works, just look at the fundamental difference between two completely different kinds of engines. Old piston motors in cars run on sharp, instant explosions inside sealed cylinders, where gasoline must ignite in a single flash. A modern airliner, however, flies thanks to mighty gas turbine engines, which are built on a completely different principle. Inside that huge turbine, the flame must never explode in chaotic jerks, or it would tear the delicate machine apart. What is needed there is continuous, powerful, perfectly even burning, resembling a controlled and furious torch that never flickers out. Kerosene's oily structure lets it burn smoothly, surrendering all its hidden heat to the very last drop without damaging detonation shocks. The whole secret lies in the special structure of the molecules inside these two liquids, which determines their hidden strength. Gasoline is made of short, light, extremely mobile chains that break apart easily and fly off into the air at the slightest heat. Kerosene, by contrast, is assembled from long, heavy, massive hydrocarbon compounds that sit packed tightly together inside the liquid. Because of this, every cubic centimeter of kerosene physically holds far more combustible elements ready to push a colossal machine forward. If a jet were fueled with gasoline, the tanks for an ocean crossing would have to grow so large, the flight would lose all meaning. This hidden energy density directly determines the economics and the very possibility of every journey you have ever taken through the sky. Thanks to the efficiency of those heavy molecules, a plane carries exactly the fuel it needs, freeing enormous weight and space. That very physical secret is what lets a jet take on hundreds of passengers, heavy suitcases, international mail, and commercial cargo. Without kerosene's unique gift of releasing maximum heat from minimum volume, the modern world would lose its cheap, fast air travel entirely. A trip to the far side of the planet would become an insanely expensive expedition instead of an ordinary afternoon flight. The full switch from gasoline to aviation kerosene became a genuine triumph of engineering evolution, not a cheap compromise for saving money. Inside the wings of every rising airliner today works a flawless physical balance, uniting colossal power, supreme fire safety, and iron endurance. The sky never forgives carelessness, so it chose a stable, dependable fuel able to survive extreme pressure, refuse to boil, and resist any stray spark. Kerosene became that faithful, irreplaceable ally of designers, quietly doing its silent work at dizzying heights hour after hour. It holds these multi-ton steel birds in the air and binds together distant cities and continents every single day, high above your head.